again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 8 o'clock where I'm at. And we're here. We're queer. Oh, there we go. In the usual space, as always, we have not much to do right now. It's an early morning. We just got here. And we're ready for today. Kind of in the mood to talk about video games right now. Just spewing out exposition about random topics of, video games. What does it mean? What does it mean to get good? You want to talk about gaming. Getting good at gaming. Why is it hard to get good? Is it really as hard as people say? Do you need a time investment? Or is it just something that people can do without actually thinking about? Like, these are the hard-boiled questions. Hey, there it is. Kind of gonna start getting in the habit of doing these a little more. I could easily try to crank out an hour or two. I usually have a random thought in the morning that kind of gets me rambling. I tend to think out loud. I tend to critically reflect daily and, make mental notes. So that's what we're going to talk about. I was earlier, before I got here, was thinking about, I guess you can say gaming and some of the experiences that I've had playing PvP and PvP games, specifically first-person shooters and some team-based games. What's the real goal? And is it important to be good at the game and things like that? It's a topic I'm sort of passionate about. I do play to win. I do play to do 110% of my absolute best as much as possible, as often as possible. Sort of, the part of me that enjoys gaming a lot. I play to win in the beginning, like most people, right? We crank it in, and we want to. If we're not playing story, we're playing, progression. Some sort of drive for, development, to see how far you can push it, see how far you can go, right? That's what it's all about. Yeah, we're still wearing the merch. Always gonna wear the merch. Gonna be getting ready to take orders soon, and just wanna make it very clear. So get this. One thing a lot of people have an issue with is the phrase "get good." Like, what? It's like, I don't have the time. I don't know what to do. And it's like, there's a certain accountability and responsibility on the individual to ask themselves, how good do you want to be? It's just like if you played sports. I always associate gaming with sports, because sports started off as just recreational activities, games. Then they became sports because when competition spikes up, it's like, oh, this is interesting to watch. And that's kind of like how video games are started off, just like basketball, just like, they're just kids games that eventually, people took to the next level because they were good at it. You know, all those early basketball stars, all those early basketball players were considered, grown men that were playing the kids game, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. They were told the same thing that most people who play video games today were told, and they have people who were really good but couldn't keep playing, and they fell off to do, get a real job. Same thing with gaming. You have people who have to go and get real jobs despite being, abnormally good, right? Those are just the outliers. And you have people who could work hard to get there too, and then they can't do it because of the same reason. So it's like, how good do you want to be? It's always the question when you're faced with gaming. How good do you want to be? Where do you want to place in the skill bracket, skill level of the game's hierarchy? Like, what is it that you want to achieve? How far do you want to take it? So that's one way to look at it, right? Everybody wants to go to the top, but that's not how that works. Not everybody can, because they don't have the time investment, they don't have the motivation, drive, or discipline. They don't have the mindset, right? You can have the motivation, discipline, but you don't have the mindset, right? And it's like, well, what do I do with that? Well, as far as the get good portion of that, it goes like this. What part of, I guess the question would be, what is your personal issue, right? I don't think anybody ever focuses on the accountability portion or the responsibility portion. So, how's it going? And so, got something in my room. That's something else. Sorry about that. But yeah. All right. Have a good one. And so we go into the whole responsibility, accountability, and that sort of part of the topic. How much of your personal failure is related to your lack of discipline, focus, concentration? How much of your personal failure is, how much of it is your fault versus your actual hurdles, right? There's hurdles that you have to get over, and then there's your ability to get over the hurdles. And so this is where the whole get good phrase comes in, right? People mostly say, well, they just assume you have the ability, right? Maybe you don't, and that's why the hurdle's there. Or maybe you have the ability and you don't apply, and that's where personal responsibility and accountability comes in at. So it's two things rather than one. And then you can just diagnose it from there, right? How's it going? How's it going, Alex? We're talking about getting good in gaming, right? It's just talking about general video games, right? It's a critical concept. A lot of people think getting good means, just play better, but there's two sides to that. It requires a critical thought. It's a random thought that I had today, so I'm just talking about it. If you wish to hang out and express some ideas, go for it. I just had a thought about it because it's a conversation I have with friends. I'm good. How are you? I'm doing great. Kind of working, showing off some of the merchandise that I have on the way. Officially getting ready to sell soon. So we do have Eagle Era merch. Mask is kind of nice. What are you doing this early? Well, I guess it's 8 o'clock for me. Almost 8:30. But I just had a thought on some video games. It's kind of my hobby and passion. Video games and writing. Yeah, it took a while to get, but thanks to some friends and everything. Hey, it's Vinny. I ain't never seen you this early, bro. How you doing? Hey, Vinny with the resub. Hey, thanks for the 10 months, bro. Yeah, I can actually crank IRL streams now. I got a new phone and everything, so I could probably start cranking these out on a daily. Yesterday I was live to test the camera again. It was only 20 minutes. It wasn't too much. It's just random exposition yesterday. But today I actually got a topic with some structure, so it's a lot easier to follow it rather than, just chatting it up. And we're talking about being the best 60% you can possibly be, which is the topic. Get good, right? There's 2 hurdles to getting good. And even though, some people can only get 60% of their overall potential, or their max potential is only 60% of the necessary skill to play, that doesn't mean that they can't be the best 60% that they can, right? Same thing with the 100%ers, right? There's a certain point where personal accountability and responsibility has to come into play, which is the thing. And then you have the hurdle of victory, right? So we're just basically critically thinking and diagnosing those 2 things. And then I want to shift over to the topic of, moving up the ladder, right? And so it's like, well, time investment plus consistency. Hey, we got a follow. Thanks, Alex. So that's where we're starting. And I'm addressing all tiers, right? All skill tiers. So the average player is usually what you would call a 60%er, right? They do everything fairly, decently, but they're not like this superstar, right? And these are the people who make up the actual game, And these are also the people who occasionally say, well, if I had more time. Well, if you did actually get in a hypothetical sense, if a person who says, well, if I had more time, they would play better, right? Well, in today's conversation, let's say that person did get the time, right? How good would you actually be? Because how much would you actually put in, right? And, a lot of those people who say, well, I would put in, I would do this, I would do that. And it's like easy to say that hypothetically speaking, but like, are you willing to sit there and play 12 hours? If you could, would you? Right? Do they, let's say they do. Say they do, right? All right. So you would build your 60%. And it's like, okay, you would have to, 1, put the time in. You have to put the consistency in, right? That's the other half. And then you would have to go through execution, which is getting over the hurdle, right? And, eventually you would climb. And that's the idea, right? But that's not the actuality, because a lot of the people who say that they're there to get over that hurdle are just there to have fun. And so that's another thing. Can you play and not have fun? Which is the other side of the get good coin, right? Getting good means eventually you're going to play out of pure muscle memory. You're not having fun anymore. You're here to simply show off. And that's a top-down look, because I've played 2 games at the top, and it's like, it's not a pretty world. It's not. It's so it's like, but there's a sweet spot, and I want to talk, and that's another thing that it's about. It's like that sweet spot where it's still fun to play, it's still competitive, but you're not like getting, raffle stomped. You're not a rag doll versus a chihuahua, So that's sort of what I'm talking about, that area. Like, there's a portion when you're building up, whether you're starting out or overachieving, There's a sweet spot you hit, and that's the line. That's the line that divides every competitive game, right? Sometimes it's a little higher up, sometimes a little lower down, but there's a line, and there are people who cross it and they never go back, and there are people who meet it and then they fall down. And so it's like, well, what about the people that play at that line? Those are the people who are enjoying the game the most. Not the ones at the top, not the ones at the bottom, but the people who meet the line consistently. And those are the people we're talking about. How do you be one of those guys? Because the people who pass that line can't go back down. It's just impossible. And the people who play there, they're having the time of their lives day in and day out, right? Balanced games, fun experiences, making friends, connecting. Like, the whole phrase of get good is more or less for the top and the bottom, right? The top says it because, they're at the top, right? It's like, oh, I put in all the work, I put in all the time. You don't match because get good, right? And then the bottom says it, from a place of spite because, they say they don't have the time. They say they don't have the energy or the drive or the consistency. And it just goes into this enduring term of, a joke or a meme or even a situation of, how you say, like I said earlier, spite. And that's kind of like the thought. And it's like, well, that kind of sucks. And then you have those people who give it 110% regardless of where they fall, which is another demographic. I prefer those people, personally speaking. Someone, regardless of where they are, they'll give it 110. It might not be the best 110, it might not be the cleanest or straightest, but, they're out there to have a good time. They're out there to make the most. So, how do we get them up? Well, accountability and responsibility. Remember that. So it's like, okay, I go into, well, for me, I would say, like, I played like Destiny and Apex. And those are the two games I played well. In terms of Destiny, it's like, well, if you're having a hard time keeping up or wanting to get better, it's like, well, what do? Well, there's, like you told me for Guilty Gear, there's if you're still here, Vinny, there's the whole execution, reaction times, and then there's the knowledge, right? You got 3 variations in fighting games, but in FPS games you have those same variations. You have people who can read the battlefield, no pun intended for Battlefield gamers, right? But they can read the situation, right? And sometimes their execution is pretty sloppy, but they got a good game sense. Good game sense and awareness can lead you to victory. You just have to utilize it. And that's a lot of thing. That's the one thing a lot of people overlook, right? They look at a pro player and they go, oh man, Shroud just killed like 40 people and he just clicked on heads. And I'm like, no, that's not for everybody. Execution isn't everybody. Some people are IQ gamers and they will outsmart you with, a well-placed trap, a frag grenade off a wall, some things like that. And then it's like, well, those kind of games don't always get the spotlight because they're considered lucky, but, a calculated move is a calculated move. So some of the people who are struggling to get good might not realize they may be an IQ gamer. Like, generally, you deal with awareness and, like, more or less game sense. That's you. Right? Maybe you don't click on heads in terms of FPS or have great execution in terms of fighting games. Just because I'll make references for fighting games because you're here, Vinny. But you're about, okay, this person does this, this, and this. Oh, then they're probably here. right? So those IQ gamers, IQ Superstars.